We Made This. Hello and welcome to the Life's Milestones podcast. My name's Mark Adams and I am a humanist celebrant. Currently, I'm trained in funerals and weddings, and I've got naming ceremony training coming up in May and June later this year. This is my Humanist Celebrants podcast. It is about birth and naming ceremonies, relationships and marriage, death and funerals. And this is a fortnightly podcast, and on each episode I will have a different guest talking about those topics. My background is I've been a Humanist Celebrant for about 18 months now, and prior to that I've been a wrestling announcer for many companies around the UK. Currently I work for Hope Wrestling, Catch Pro Wrestling, In Out Wrestling, Pro Wrestling for You, and This Is Wrestling. I'm a pub quiz host at the Head Bar in Stretford, and I'm the host of another podcast, Pull or Pass, which is a weekly comic book podcast, and I regularly host as a guest on Super Tap Film Club, and I've also had lots of podcasts in the past, including BritRest Chat and various other things, BritRest Chat being a wrestling podcast. I'm a scout leader. I have an explorer unit that I am the section leader for, and I also volunteer for 3 other scout groups around the Stretford area. I'm a former librarian with a degree in English literature, and, well, I'm a business owner. My celebrant job is my own business. And this podcast is aimed at not necessarily utilising my famous friends, although I do have a few of those through wrestling. It's more about supporting and promoting other small businesses and getting them out there and getting their stories. It is just a podcast about how people live their lives from birth to marriage to death. And I think there's so many fascinating stories out there, and I'm in a very fortunate position that I know a lot of very interesting people through various things that I do with my life. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to offer this, I think, innovative and different podcast that will hopefully be entertaining for anyone from any walk of life. I fully expect people to tune in for their friends, or for someone that's particularly famous, or someone that they think will be particularly interesting, but then perhaps you'll stick around and listen to all the other episodes because you like the format of the show. The show is a candid show with some very personal questions, so there are some people that I've asked that have said no, and that's okay, but I've also got a lot of interesting folk who want to talk about these things, and I'm looking forward to how that comes across and how everyone's stories are going to be different, despite the fact that I'm asking pretty much the same questions every single week. I want a diverse podcast with guests who are young and old, male and female, gay and straight, religious, non-religious, anything else that you can think of. I don't just want to be interviewing people like me. And I'm fortunate enough to have interesting folk who are comfortable talking about the deep and personal stuff. And I'm looking forward to bringing this podcast to you because it's a passion project of mine. Of course, it's fueled by the fact that I'm a humanist celebrant, and I tend to be there for a lot of people's life's milestones. But it's not just about humanist ceremonies, it's about everybody's ceremonies and everybody's life experiences. I think you're going to love it. Life's Milestones is part of the We Made This podcast network. We are a group of geeky type people who are into music, film and other geeky things. Other fantastic shows on the network include Make It So, which is about Star Trek Picard, Cinemortuary, about bad remakes, Pick a Disc, which is a music one about having an album that you would like to talk about. Without a Mouse is about obscure Disney films. The X-Cast is probably their most famous one, which is an episode by episode rundown and discussion of all the episodes of the X-Files. And there's also, which I'm going to be involved in quite regularly, I'm hoping, an upcoming MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, podcast from the We Made This podcast network. And that's it for this very brief hello, this is Mark, this is what I'm doing episode of the podcast. My first episode drops in 2 weeks' time, and that will be with my oldest friend, Chris Clough, who I've known for 36 years. And considering I'm only 41, that's pretty cool. Chris is one of the owners of the Torside Brewery in New Mills. He's an incredibly interesting man, and I'm looking forward to bringing you that first episode. Life's Milestones is a podcast by me, Mark Adams. Follow me on Twitter at MarkAdamsHC. That's also my handle for Instagram. If you're looking for my website, it's www.humanist.org.uk/Mark Adams. If you're looking for my Facebook, it's Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant. All the information on how to use me as your celebrant is there. The show's social media is at Life's Milestones on Twitter. Other than that, I am just using my celebrant contacts for the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Previously on the We Made This network. Pick up a podcast.
Back in September, I got asked to be on a show called America's Next Top Podcaster. And it was a kind of American Idol style competition show.
Okay, yeah.
So it was 12 contestants, and every week we would get a challenge, and we'd have to come up with a 10 to 15 minute or 5 to 10 minute podcast based around that challenge. And so we'd be in teams, and we'd have to work together, and they'd switch up the teams and all of that. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened at the time, because it gave me a fresh influx, not only of creative outlets, because I got to try doing things that were outside of my wheelhouse. It wasn't just movie discussions anymore. I had to do full-on production. We had to do music and a bunch of stuff that I don't do on my show.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast.
Especially after he gets his finger broken, he shrinks away from this guy. Like, Mulder is clearly terrified of him, and has a lot of scorn and contempt and hatred for him too. But obviously is just like very physically intimidated by him. We don't see Mulder physically intimidated by people very often at all in this show, and so really like seeing him extremely vulnerable to somebody this violent and this dangerous who takes pleasure in being violent and dangerous is like the novelty of that, I think itself is part of what makes it frightening.
Pick a disc.
Get your bingo cards ready, kids. It is just the most perfect slice of alt country heartbreak.
Okay.
It's a collection of just dark, bitter tales about fucked up relationships. Some of them possibly about the same person. I don't know the history of these songs, but there's everything in there. There's love, there's hate, there's regret, there's revenge, bitterness, drunkenness. It's the whole of humanity wrapped up in alt country and steel pedal guitar.
Okay.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.